So what I was saying is that the way in which art and science come together through this new technology is quite extraordinary. And one of the questions that I want to actually have you think about initially is exactly the question that William brought up at the beginning, these different technologies of virtual reality. And I wonder how each of you would speak to the idea of data-created reality and photographic reality, and how you think about the differences in terms of story and really stimulation. So that we can explore these two terrains a little bit further. But before you can mull just a bit, I want to collect maybe 3 or 4 responses or questions from the audience at this stage. Does anybody want to respond or stake some ground in terms of what you're curious about, what you think about what you just heard? You're processing. All right, great. Well, then we'll just go with this question. Oh, is there somebody in the back? Great. And seriously, these are, it doesn't have to be the most all-encompassing question. Thoughts are welcome too. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the connection between the people being displayed on the scene and what's happening. It seems like a lot of VR up to this moment is just pure experiential. We really lose that emotive connection between me, the observer, and the individuals in there. I'd love to hear how you guys bring that connection in more. You touched upon it a little bit, but I'd love to hear more about how you're approaching that.
That's a great comment. Another comment? Reflection? Yes.
I'm also interested how you guys try to balance narrative with agency, because virtual reality in some ways is all about maximizing agency, but at the same time, how do you try to tell a story for that? Or what choices do you make? Or do you try to create scenes where you're moving between a place where you're exploring and then trying to bring them back in? And sort of what tools are sort of best allowing you to move between these different states?
And could you just identify yourself and your practice if you're an artist or if you're...
I'm a VR producer and director and with Sensorium Works.
Excellent, that's great. Sava?
Hi, I'm Sava, documentary filmmaker, interdisciplinary artist. I'm wondering, for all of you, kind of, what has been the timelines from idea to actual completion and the budgets and the actual, what is the expertise that you've needed to bring in from outside in order to make these projects come to life?
Excellent. And maybe one more comment or question. Yep.
I'm going to sort of bring in what I feel like...
Could you identify?
Oh, sorry, yes. Siobhan O'Flynn, University of Toronto. Thank you all. I want to very quickly sort of bring in what I feel like is an absent presence. And I don't know how many people in the room know Shar Davies' work from the 90s, sort of early VR, which was haptic VR. So that presence was actually created through basically a harness that responded to both your sort of vertical kind of presence where you stood, which allowed you to move through the environment, or your breathing. And I think the sort of the value of really thinking through presence in terms of haptic VR is kind of lost when we just think about the visual. And I'm just going to open that up.
That's great.
Because you should be here today.
That's great. Does anybody want to dive into the first question, this last question, actually? They all have to do with agency and body.
I can dive into the last one, actually,
Yes.
about the haptics. In the Eyes of the Animal project, we use those haptic vests to kind of give the feeling of wings as an animal, how it feels like to be a dragonfly. Therefore, you should have wings. And vibrating those wings would kind of stimulate a bit more that changing your perception, almost swapping out with something else. So, and also, it's not the only one. I think I've seen many applications that they are using the similar approaches, which using either sound or particularly just for haptic feedback, those vests and some other products coming out as well. So yeah, there are different applications interestingly using.
It would be good to as we move towards a more complex ecosystem of devices and attachment to complicate the virtual reality that we're playing with, to also go along understanding what's the narrative capacity. So to not just getting you more engaged, but also what it means to have wings and to understand your character. If it's what it actually does to your character.
Yeah, it's almost like you want to deconstruct. Like, you want to see why really you feel that way, or what actually goes on. Like, if I see a cup of coffee and I want it, like, why? Is it because I'm thirsty? Okay, but like, what triggers that? Like, what's the like deconstructed wings for a creature, which we don't know because we've never had wings, but is it flight? Is it movement? Is it a particular? I don't know. It's like, what does the mind actually do in those situations?
I suppose it's like having ears that you know they are there and you can move them if you really want to, but you don't feel them when you are hearing. Or in the same sense, although this is a little kind of giving a sense of how it feels like to have wings since yesterday, but you've been around for ages. So it's like, obviously it's not the same feeling, it's not embedded, that's therefore, it's really difficult to deconstruct. But from story point of view, yeah, that's interesting, how it feels like to have wings that comes and goes, and you can build the story around it. Like a dolly camera versus a crane. So
Yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Well, it's also just like, that's actually really interesting, because I was thinking about how like you forget that you have limbs sometimes. Like you don't remember you have physical presence until it's gone, or until like, oh, my arm hurts and now suddenly I realize I have an arm. I'm like, oh right, an arm. Like it's kind of weird, because then that also means like, what are the implications of that? Also, I don't know.
Do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, maybe like when we talk about physical presence, so for example, you have been creating work, the two of you, that embrace a more kind of imaginary kind of language, right? Like the visual representation doesn't necessarily look like strict reality. And so it feels like it sort of opens up all the language of the imagination. In the live action space, we've done initial experiments with light field technologies, which is a capacity to capture not just from a fixed point of view, but from multiple point of view at the same time, which grants you the freedom inside of the virtual reality experience to move and to experience parallax and a real sense of physical space. And what is very disconcerting is that if you're looking at someone that is looking straight into the camera lenses as if he was looking straight into your eyes, but you have the capacity to move out of the eye line of the person, the eyes will not necessarily follow because it's filmed. And it's extremely disconcerting. It's as if, I'm moving in front of, but your eye line stays there. And so it completely breaks presence. It completely breaks my sense of engagement. So even if I have an enhanced physical presence as a viewer, because and I feel your body presence more because you're a real fleshed out human being that I can experience by moving around you, your eyes and your focus does not follow. And it really breaks my sense of connection with you. And so there are some qualities to that, to being granted more physical freedom inside of a VR experience, but there are also downsides to that we've found out.
That makes me think about the limits. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just want to complement the thing of, if we're going to start talking about reality, I mean, yes, is the photorealistic approach to reality is the reality of the camera, of the photographic camera, that captures light. With our approach, we're capturing the reality of another machine. So I really love your approach in terms of what it means to have this post-humanistic bridge towards the other, towards the animal, towards the machine, towards whatever that thing is, and what it brings to understanding of your own self. So yeah, it's another reality. I wouldn't say that it's not photorealistic. It's just a reality of another set of devices, set of factors.
I mean, it also goes into, there's that question about like, well, what do you do? How do you craft when you don't? How do you actually start crafting this stuff like narratively? Like, what's, if the viewer is the one in charge, then how do you? And I think that was I'm sorry if that wasn't the question, but I'm going to pretend like it was. So what's interesting is that, so I've been filming a lot. And like, I think maybe other than Felix, like it's just, I've seen so many stitches, and a lot of the stuff I've seen, and I feel like a crazy person, is like, I've let like things emerge kind of naturally just from capturing real life, just seeing what happens. And a lot of what I've been noticing is that, and it's not anything new, but like I actually really love when I catch someone looking at me, but they're not there staring at me. Like the performance aspect, or the performing nature of a lot of the VR that I've been seeing is kind of uncomfortable and awkward. So it's almost like trying to craft, like timing wise and blocking wise, like what's actually happening. And you can gauge that from like, okay, I know you're looking over there. So then I know that like you'll probably get bored. Like I get bored around 3 seconds. So then I turn and suddenly there's someone there looking at me, but then they look the other way. But if that's the emotion that I want there, then what happens over here? So it's complex, but like to your point of just like deconstructing the real and like actually having the realities, like just being in a space and understanding what works and what doesn't, but then not necessarily doing that literally when you do create VR. Like just knowing that those are the kind of like little moments and nuances of real life that can then be applied to something radically different, I think is where the magic of a lot of this stuff is.
It seems like there are almost two strands of experimentation here. One is actually, or maybe comment on this, one is actually trying to do your best to recreate the experience of the body in space, right? And get as close to that as you possibly can. It's very filmic in terms of a film tradition trying to do that. And there's another tradition here that's exploring how you trigger the imagination and create a new reality that has something to do with real lived experience, but is an extrapolation of it, is an extension of it. And it's almost that dream world that William was talking about, if we could reproduce the dream world. Is there a fair kind of way of thinking about two of the main channels of work that are going on right now in VR?
I would think so. I mean, I would think that we generally define in our work that there are two modes of immersion that we like to explore. One is a form of physical immersion, like for example, the first piece we talked about called Strangers. So you're sitting with an artist. It's a physical experience. It's meant to reproduce you as a human being sitting in a space with someone. But there are other projects that we're working on which are more like you're just a floating consciousness, and it's not about physical presence. It's really about either you're embracing a character's consciousness and sort of exploring the reality through that, or you're just an undefined consciousness within a space. And even if it's not an abstract space, even if it's a space that is highly photoreal. So there are different modes of thinking about the viewer's presence. One that's more physical, one that's more, I would say, eerie or undefined or abstract. But I think that all of those choices lead to a much different kind of psychological and emotional engagement for the viewer. And it's a major aspect of VR storytelling to define that, I think.
Other thoughts on that?
I agree. One thing, completely agree. That's obviously there are two ways now to make content produce. There are some rare examples that are mixing those two, filmic content with game engines and constructed reality. One interesting thing about when I look back like 5 years to games, which they start obviously this exponential growth in the budget of game making reflected on employing Hollywood stars as a filmic experiences between chapters. Therefore, game became this piece of art that you interact with it for a chapter, and then you watch a piece of film, and then you continue. So, and I feel like these two pathways, although they look kind of parallel but different, it will emerge over the time. So, light through a camera is capturing three-dimensional data with super high fidelity. Therefore, you can actually add three-dimensional objects within that world super easily. So it's like, as the technology develops and those pipelines are a bit more established, it's going to be a single path of storytelling, maybe combination of those two ways now we have.
I just want to remind people, if you have thoughts or comments, we have another 15 minutes, so please go up to the mics and we'll call on you so we can extend the conversation. One of the things that I was listening for and thinking about after the keynote actually was this idea of the tension with VR between the notion of immersion and the idea of surveillance and being surveilled. And I wonder if any of you think about that in the work that you're doing.
When you say being surveilled, you mean feeling like a voyeur? Is that what you mean?
The experience of being able to see everything in your purview, this sort of desire to recreate the autonomy of gaze, I suppose, within an environment.
We saw the panopticon picture at the beginning of your presentation.
Yes.
Yes, noted.
But there's a
Well,
tension there.
there's a tension
Interesting.
indeed.
So you are the surveiller as the visitor. I love the notion of not user, but you are also a surveiller in a way, but you can also be surveilled depending on the kind of narrative.
If-
but
if
this
we allow-
idea of watcher and being watched and being in a space.
If we allow the anxiety of these times, of these days, we can call it surveillance and we can see it through that lens. But it also has a narrative capacity. When you see the body of the performer, the user, in the space, you have another dimension to the VR work, to the VR experience. Not just what happens inside, but that user in the space and what happens to the people that are queuing up. They're getting some information from their performance, from their wows, from their wailing arms. They get a bit of, it's a kind of performative teaser in front of them.
I think that there could be a lot more done in this space. I'm actually excited to see if you do anything with that, Oscar, because that seems to be up your alley. But it's like, I don't know if anyone ever played The Witness or is playing The Witness. It's a really frustrating game. But basically, it's this island filled with puzzles, and you figure out a lot of the puzzles, and then you go back. A friend of mine went and said, "Oh, did you realize that the island itself is a puzzle also?" I'm like, "What?" And so like you go back, you're like, fuck, like you're just like looking at it and like realizing like everything's a puzzle, and suddenly your mind just explodes because you just think everything's a puzzle and you go crazy. And it is, and that's life, but whatever. But I guess I've come to terms with that. But what's interesting is there are these layers of what VR is now. Like I almost feel like the way people moves through something to me is a code. Like when I made my first film, and we premiered it at like Google I/O, which is like, you saw. So like you're watching people put this on, and I knew if I was right or not by how they were rotating. So I knew in the beginning, like they're rocks, and I was like, okay, well I predict they're gonna be kind of like this. They're not gonna be like, spinning suddenly. And then because there's spatial audio, and audio is really important, I had planted the mountain climber, which I knew, I couldn't be sure, but I could make a strong guess that they'd look at him. I planted him behind them, so they had to turn in order to find him. And then you saw them go, oh. Because it was like, otherwise I'd have to literally move them. So it's like this weird, it's like this dance of like coordinating like where things land, where things plant. And it almost seemed kind of like this weird, like if you actually have them all in the same space doing the same thing, it's almost like kind of a hilarious like dance thing. And you see, of course, like some people not doing it, which is also kind of funny. But I think there's something really remarkable about like what does that performance look like? Is that a code for something? Can you do like the foxtrot, but have it actually be like an experience internally that's very different?
Maybe just one note, jumping on that is, for us, it's the question of the viewer's attention is honestly not one that we ask ourselves a lot. We try to first make sure that we bring the viewer in a state of mind where it's going to be fine, where he looks regardless, and we work, for example, if we come here and just randomly place a virtual reality camera here, and there is no idea to why this camera is at that height, filming from that point of view, too close from you, not positioned in a way that kind of makes sense from an anthropomorphic perspective, let's say, then you're always going to feel weird, and you're going to feel like you're a surveillance camera sort of standing in a place that doesn't make any sense. You're not going to land into the experience. But if we actually craft it differently and really conceive of where the viewer is placed and really think about it in a thoughtful way, there are more chances that as a viewer, when you experience it, you suddenly land into the experience and feel that it's right. And it's an important part of the craft. So for example, in the Sea Gypsies project, there's one sequence where there's a mother who's putting her baby to sleep, and you are there with her and her baby inside of a very, very small hut. And we wanted to capture that because the way they sing to their children is absolutely beautiful to put them to sleep. So what we did is we asked her if we could put the camera there, but before we started filming, we put it there, we let it there for like 6 hours just for her to get used to it. And we repeatedly told her, it's fine, it's just as if someone like your mother was there with you, and she accepted it. And eventually she was fine with it. And then she started doing her, her song for the baby and all of that. And we captured that moment. And so it feels right. When you're in it, you don't feel, even if it's a super private and intimate moment, you don't feel out of place, you don't feel like a voyeur, you feel like it makes sense for you to be there, and regardless of where you look into the experience, you're going to get that emotional experience.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and then we'll come to the mics.
One thing can be added to that. Actually, it's kind of the continuation of the previous topic, this like gamification and combining those different pipelines. One thing we tried, which we didn't, we had no idea what to do with the camera. But since we have a constructed reality there, it's an informative fiction, you can put your camera anywhere. So we put camera on rails for certain animals, but the others are actually gaze controlled. So it gave the control to the viewer. So they are looking right ways and it's going that way. And so I think it's somewhere in between. There's this like, I don't know where the decision of director falls into that thing, but we can probably give control to the viewer to see some content. Maybe not today for filmic, but it will be soon. So there is this big question mark, which I have no idea. Like it's just we are still fiddling, but you know it's interesting to hear.
That's great, Damon.
How y'all doing? My name is Damon. I'm a filmmaker and artist. My question is, how does this technology get to normal people, or to the people like communities of color, poor people? How does the technology get there? And you use the word voyeur. And my thing is, when you say you don't feel like a voyeur, why is it that you don't? Because, quite frankly, like everybody in your portfolio was like black or brown. And my question is, how does that get back to those communities? Like when you showed the people, the tribe that you were with, you showed them what virtual reality was. Did you leave any of that stuff there for them to actually use to tell their own stories? And how does that happen? How does the technology get into the hands of the people that are living the stories? And that's my main problem with the idea of VR becoming virtual reality, because yeah, the intent never is that. But the same, like VR is kind of already here when we talking about black people. When you just talk about rap music, people play this, but they'll never go to those communities that are making that music is coming from. But you can live like that in your mind for a second. So how does that not happen when you can actually be in the body of a black person, or you can actually be in that situation? You know what I mean? Like, and it's great to talk about the technical aspect, but when we talk about ethics, what questions are in your mind as you're making these things, and like what do you and how do you give the agency back to the people that you're looking at in certain situations? You know what I'm saying?
That's a great question. Thanks.
I mean, I'm particularly sensitive, if you didn't get that. But like one of the first things, and this is actually how Oscar and I met, was I went to Johannesburg and we did a workshop for artists that were from the continent, basically, which I hate saying because it's a large continent, but and the ideas are there and they're great. Like one of the this guy Jim made one of the most, like, he in a day made something in Unity, and he was a filmmaker and he was just like, I don't know, I just did this, and it was like, I think we were working on it like up to the last minute, and it was like great. And I firmly believe, like, in my job, I work at Google, like I have access to stuff, and a lot of my job, amongst a billion other things, is to try to figure out spiritually where we should take the rigs, where I should take the rig that I own. And a lot of it's been like trying to enable folks. I firmly believe with, like, I'd rather teach someone in a refugee camp how to film something than to go into a refugee camp, film something, and leave. It's just tough because even with, did I just totally, okay. So, hello? Oh, cool, thanks. What's really difficult is that the technology is also trying to catch up, because even if I do leave a camera, say in Zatari, right, and just say, okay, gonna teach you guys how to use this, bye. Like, the internet isn't great. There's a lot of data that this stuff captures. It's really hard to manage all of that data. I can barely do it, and I work at a tech company. Like, we can't say that, like, there are ideas and it's wonderful and it's awesome and we want everyone to have it. It's just that there's a realistic situation with the tech and a dialogue with the tech that makes it difficult in a lot of these places to get these cameras and to get this technology to folks.
So what is the barrier? Is it a language barrier? Because
No, there's no language barrier at all. It's literally just like the infrastructure of a lot of these communities is not great. So unless we literally have an army of people carting hard drives to and from these communities, which we probably should, but that's another thing, right? So it's just tough. I mean, I compare it to slow-mo running in a dream, where like I see what we need to do, and I think a lot of us do. It's just it's tough, but we can learn from other mediums failing at that to know that that's something that we need to do from out of the gate, stuff that we need to do now, instead of waiting until it's a problem and then trying to fix it and then realizing we can't anymore.
To me, it's a tech barrier, nothing more than that. 2 years ago, virtual reality headsets were that big, and the cameras we used to use were enormous, and they were consuming a crazy amount of data. It was just completely ridiculous and unmanageable to even take it out in the field. And now the tools are starting to be more optimized. The virtual reality headsets are mobile-based, which make them very easy to use, and the virtual reality cameras, mainly through what these guys are doing with the platform of Jump, for example, at Google, are becoming more and more accessible, and the data processing is becoming more and more accessible. So think of it as where film cameras were at the beginning of the 20th century and where they are now with those little digital cameras that all of those communities in the world can have access to. The same will arrive in VR. So I think it's just a matter of time and technical barriers.
I dig that. So, in the meantime, before we get to that,
Could I just get responses from, because we're going to have to wind up. I'd love, because this is such an important question, if Oscar or Ersin has a response to this, that'd be okay. And then I think we have like 2 minutes, I want to play this out a little bit, and then we can keep talking as we keep going into the panels and in the breaks. Is that all right? Yeah. Okay.
Because yes, we can get trapped in the. Is that all right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. We can get trapped into the plastic, into the electronics, into how do we move those things, and you know that we don't have access to that. Not all of us have access to the plastics and the electronics that we need to get our hands on to play with this and to be part of it. So we cannot fix that. If we cannot fix that, let's find another path. And I think it has to do with the creative approach to the narratives. That's exactly what we're proposing, that our storytelling doesn't rely solely and necessarily fundamentally in the appearance of the subject, of the character. It's not about black people, yellow people, or Latinos. It's about how you live through your days. What are your actions? What describes your life? And you are the only carrier, the only bearer of that knowledge. No one will come and try to capture that. You only know that. And you can claim that.
Real quick, one of the first documentary filmmakers like Vertov, Cinema Verite, I can never pronounce it. Cinema Verite, you basically have, all of that was from documentarians actually just taking cameras and completely messing with them. They made their own stuff. They're like, this doesn't work. I don't have this, so how do I create it? So there's this whole idea of also if it can't get there fast enough, and we're seeing it right now as a barrier, then help us fix it. Do something. Please, I would love that. I would love for someone to just be like, I built this, and people have, and it's remarkable what people have built just by having absolutely nothing.
But it's not about the plastic. It's about the language.
True. Yeah. But it's also kind of. There's a little bit of both.
You can make that 51% more meaningful.
Yes.
Ersin?
Well, technology will be there quite soon, so that's not going to be a problem in a few years' time. It's a great point that if you can share this knowledge as you go those places. But one other thing is, for someone who don't have access to those places, time or various other reasons, being able to see a bit more than a single image or a flat video, I think that still adds about the consciousness of this area, this human being, that part of the world exists. So I think it serves both ways, and filmmakers being more conscious about sharing this whole exploration phase, which is happening for the first time for our generation with VR. It would be great sharing this knowledge and stuff. So yeah.
This is a great, we need to continue this conversation during the course of the day, for sure. Right now we're going to close. I want to thank this panel for shaking the snow globe with us. And we'll see you all during the day. Thank you very much.